So I'm really quick going to review the main points you should take away from chapters 16 and 17. And I'm putting them together in one video because they kind of are just two short chapters addressing the same thing. So 16 and 17 are revisiting the things about ethos we talked about last week from chapters 5 through 8. And in this case, now they're flipping it around and helping you figure out how to evaluate other people's ethos. And so we're going to use the virtue, practical wisdom, and disinterest framework, just like we used in chapter 6, 7, and 8. And now we're just kind of turning it around and figuring out how do you judge this in other people instead of it being about how do I display these traits. So when you're evaluating somebody else's virtue, he gives you 3 guidelines to use. He says you're looking for a state of character. And so that just means, is their virtue right for this situation? Do their values match the situation? Is it appropriate? Concerned with choice. And so the other person allowing you the room to make the decision instead of trying to force something on you, that is an important aspect of their virtue. So you want to look for someone who is allowing you to make the decision instead of trying to push you into something and pressure you into something. And then the third thing is lying in a mean, which sounds weird. But what he means is someone who's moderate, who kind of lies in the middle of an issue. And so you don't want someone who jumps to extremes. You want someone who is more moderate most of the time. We talked about this I guess it was in the virtue section last time. And it's just about, you don't want to locate yourself at the extremes too often. You want to try to, as much as possible, locate yourself more toward the middle. And one of his examples of this is if you encounter a salesperson and first they should ask you what your price range is. And if they do that and you say, like in his example, his mom, if her price range was $50 to $100, that person should then be looking for $75-ish items. If she says $50 to $100 and then he goes and shows her a $2,000 pool table, that is not lying in a mean. So you want someone who's going to be moderate and not jump to extremes. That is a good test of their virtue. And again, if they fail any of these tests, it doesn't mean you can't trust them at all. It just means that you want to proceed with caution. Same thing when you're talking about disinterest. I'm kind of doing them out of order now. But disinterest is really similar. So what are your interests in this particular situation and what are theirs? He uses salespeople as an example because it's a really good way to illustrate this. So your interest when you're going to buy something is probably most of the time get the thing you need and spend as little money as possible getting that thing that you need. In some situations, the salesperson has an interest in you spending more money. If they work on any kind of a commission, they want you to spend as much money as they can get you to spend. And so in those cases, your interests might be in conflict. If your interest is in spending little money and their interest is in getting you to spend a lot money, then you have conflicting interests. And so what he's wanting you to do is pay attention to what are the interests here and are they in conflict. If they are in conflict, then it doesn't mean, again, that you can't trust them. You just want to be more cautious. If you know that your interests are aligned, you both want the same thing, then that is not a red flag and you don't have to be concerned about their disinterest. And then practical wisdom is the last one we'll talk about. And this one is just mostly based in experience. He says the 2 kind of tests for practical wisdom in another person. If you're asking for advice, you want to hear them start off with some variation of that depends before they give you advice. So if it's parenting advice, it's a good sign of them having practical wisdom. If they start off with some variation of it varies by the kid and one thing doesn't work for every child. If they start off with this is the way I did it with my kid and it worked, so you need to do it exactly the same way, they probably don't have the practical wisdom you're looking for because every kid is different. The same thing is true about relationship advice, pretty much every kind of advice. It pretty much always depends on the situation. Someone who shows that they know that, that's someone you want to listen to because they know how the real world works and they're not just going off of like some instruction manual that won't always work. So you want to hear that depends, and then you want some tale of comparable experience. If you're taking parenting advice from someone who has never raised a child or taken care of a child, they don't have comparable experience. You probably don't necessarily need to put a lot of stock in their advice. If they have some experience with raising kids, maybe not their own, but they know a lot about it, or they have a degree in child psychology or something, maybe then they've got the kind of experience that you might want in someone who's offering you advice. And then one other thing he lumps in here is also what he calls sussing ability. And I mentioned this last week as well. Sussing ability is that person who can like get to the core of what an issue is. Like the one who sees through all of the mess and is like, here is where the problem is. And so as an example of that, that can compensate for lack of experience. You might have a friend who has not been in a lot of relationships, but they're really good at understanding people. And so they may have sussing ability as it pertains to people and conflict. And so while they may not have experience in relationships, if they're really good at figuring out problems in relationships, you may still want to listen to their advice. They might actually be good at that without the personal experience in the relationship. They may have gleaned that from other things, or they may just understand it really well. So that can be a part of practical wisdom also. So those are the three things that he's just sort of reviewing and flipping around so you can evaluate them from the other perspective if you're trying to figure out whether you should trust someone else.